Hello, hello, hello. So, welcome to lesson three. Hmm. So, we're going to continue on directions. Okay. We did relative directions previously. So, we're going to continue with directions. So, there are three basic directions. Yeah. So, guys, thank you for tuning in again. Um, so, we're going to take off lesson two. Okay. So, the only type of direction that does not involve numbers is relative direction, the one that we did previously in lesson two. So now we're going to get into compass directions. Compass directions. Directions. So so let's get into it. So this is what. So let me just give a brief explanation here. So another common method of expressing directions expressing directions is to use the points of a compass of a compass. So what are the points of a compass? It's north, south, east, and west. These are the 4 points of the compass, east and west. So, and then so we say what? If a vector does not point exactly in one of the compass directions, Then we use an angle. Then we use an angle. So um, and it's what so the compass directions. And you have a compass like this. North, south, east, and west. Okay. So sometimes you may find that what? The vector does not point exactly, okay, in one of the two. So let's just look at an example. Yeah. We may have a vector like this. And we have a tail, and we have a vector that goes up that way. And it's 40 degrees. So in this way, we find that, so the vector is not exactly pointing north or west. So it's not pointing this way, and it's also not pointing north. Okay. So it's like the vector is diagonal. So the vector is this way. So this is where we use an angle. Okay, so this an angle of 40 degrees here relative to the west. So direction here is, say, west, 40 degrees north. Okay, so what this means is that this is west, and then you go west, and then you go up. If you go north, you go 40 degrees north from the west. Okay, or if you go from the north, then you go 50 degrees. Uh, if you go from the north, then you will go 50 degrees west. Okay. So you can also, so the two things should add up to 90. Okay. The two angles should add up to 90. So if you have a 40 here, you have a 50, and then you can swap the two things, the two directions. The west comes this way, and the north comes the other way. So if you swap the two directions, then the angle should be new here. But then that angle should add up to 90 with the other angle. See? So this means that north, you start from the north, then you go 50 degrees west, like this. You see, you go west 50 degrees. If you start from the north, you must go 50 degrees to the west. If you start west, then you must go 40 degrees north. So each one of the two is acceptable. So we can also use words, isn't it? We can also use words So we can also say west, and then 40 degrees north, 40 degrees, 40 degrees. Then we could say north, 50 degrees west. So we could use words, or we could use symbols. So it's the same thing. See? Then in another example, we could have the if, and then we could go up like that. Um, Up like that. Then we have 60 degrees here. So now in this case, what's happening? So our angle here is 60 degrees, and you can see the arrow here. Our vector is pointing north, but somewhat east. Okay, it's not pointing to the west like that. So what do we say here? Okay? We can say east and then 60 degrees north. So meaning when you start from the east, meaning this side, then you have to go 60 degrees north. See, start here, and then you go 60 degrees north. And then we can swap, like I said. We can exchange the what? The two directions. We can start with N and end with E. Could put N here, and then we end with E. But then what has to happen here? We say that the angle that is here must add up to 90 with that one. So then it's going to be 30 degrees. Because when we say 60 plus 30, we get 90. So in words, this is going to be east, 60 degrees north, and then the other one is going to be north, 30 degrees east, north, 30 degrees east. So these are examples. You could also have another example. For example, you could also have an angle going like that, or you could also have an angle going like that. Okay. In which case, the arrows are pointing south in this case. Okay. So we would have a south somewhere here. Okay. So in the examples that I gave, there was a north direction only. Okay. So you could also have a situation like this whereby the arrow is going south. It's moving south instead of north. Okay. It could move south in different directions. See? So it's not just north only. So you could have situations where the arrow is moving south. Okay. Now let's go to another type of direction, which is bearing. Okay. Is a last of the three. So we can also use bearing. So instead of compass, you can also use bearing. For direction. So let's look at bearing, okay? So I'll begin with a short explanation here. So I'll begin with a short explanation. A further method of expressing direction is to use a bearing. Okay? Is to use a bearing So a bearing is a direction is a direction relative, the direction relative to a fixed point. So a bearing is a direction relative to a fixed point. So, so given just an angle, given just an angle, given just an angle, so the convention is to define the angle. Convention is to define the angle. Clockwise with respect to the north. To the north. So, okay, I'll show you what all this means, okay? So another important detail here is that what? Because this makes you will be able to identify a bearing, okay? So a bearing, this is important, okay? You should keep this in mind. A bearing is always written as a three-digit number, okay? As a three-digit number. Okay, so it's always written as a so for example, okay, if we write what, for example, 275 degrees or 080 degrees. So we don't say 80 degrees in here. Okay, we're going to say 080. So if, for example, you have 30 degrees, so if we say 30 degrees, we're going to say 0 30. See, we don't use 2 digits when we're talking about a what? A bearing. So we take the angle clockwise. The angle is, so if given just an angle, okay, this is important. Given just an angle, the convention is to define the angle clockwise, okay, with respect to the north. So let me show you what this means, okay. Let's say, so we say clockwise with respect to the north. So let's say, for example, so we have a vector with a direction of 120 degrees. So let's see how this vector would look like. Okay, and we are saying, so what do we mean when you say clockwise? So, okay, you will have the tail of the vector. So now the north, okay, the north will be this way, isn't it? The north will be in that direction. So what this means is that we should go clockwise. We should go clockwise and we go 120 degrees. Okay? So we move to the north. So the convention is to move. We look at the north and then we rotate clockwise. So the 120 degrees is going to be somewhere there because it should be more than 90. So the vector will point this way. See, the vector will point this way. So you will have 120 degrees. So this is a rotation from the north of what? Of 120 degrees. And 20 degrees from the north. So this is what we mean. So we don't move anti-clockwise. You don't start from the north and then you go anti-clockwise like this. This is not bearing. When I talk about bearing, it's gonna be clockwise always. Okay. Um, so uh, another example could be, let's say, and then let's say we can do another example. So say you have a vector with the direction of 0, 3, 0. Okay, so this is just 30 degrees in simple terms. Okay, a vector with the direction of 0, 3, 0. So we start from the north. So the north is here. And then, so the tail of that vector would be here. And then it would go to the right, clockwise. The rotation would be clockwise like this. And then you would have 30 degrees here. So it would be a clockwise rotation moving from the what? From the north, you see. This is what we mean. So when you're doing bearing, your starting point is the northern side here. That's what we use as our reference point. See? Yes, so that sums it up for the direction. So we have three directions. Remember, relative direction, compass directions, and bearing. So it is important to understand all of them. Okay, it's bearing, and then there is compass directions. So with in terms of bearing, you should always remember the direction starts from the north. We call it the true north. Yeah, so I think let's leave it here for lesson 3. We are gonna get into, so it sums it up for all the directions that we're gonna look at for this topic. I hope you tune in for lesson 4. Okay. Leave your questions in the comment section, guys, and write down anything that you think can be useful for you. Something that you don't understand, and you will ask me in the comment. You let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you tune in for lesson 4. Stay focused. And I hope you tune in for lesson 4. Okay. Bye-bye for now.